Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Lunch and Learn case study on transitioning to HVO. I'm EJ Allen. I'm a consultant for Action Sustainability, which is the delivery partner for the Supply Chain Sustainability School. And I'm also sector manager for the homes and construction markets in the school. And I'm going to be facilitating today's session. So clearly there's a huge drive around cutting carbon emissions from our activities, from everything we buy, everything we use, everything we do. And plant and equipment is no exception. There's discussions around HVO, alternative fuels, and the role that they have in delivering net zero. So the school's regularly asked by our members and our partners to, what resources do you have to help us with this? And there's always requests for case studies. It's really helpful to understand those challenges and what organisations have done to overcome them. So I suppose that's why we're here today. So it's fantastic to have both Gemma and Rob here today to talk about Lovell's experience around transitioning to HVO. Before I hand over to them, just a bit of housekeeping. So we'd ask you if you have any questions as we go through today, if you could just use the Q&A function. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen with the two kind of speech bubbles. If you just use that to put your questions in, we'll be looking at those at the end of the presentation. So apologies if we don't get a chance to ask all of your questions, but we'll do our best. As we go through, we're going to be having some interactive polls using Menti. Those of you who've been to school webinars in the past will probably be very familiar with those. Just leave your phone on, or if you have a spare kind of screen web browser, then please you could use that. You don't need to download any apps, so don't worry about that. More about that in a moment. And at the end of the session, it's really important. We'd love to get your feedback. We run so many training sessions and lunch and learns every week that we're always looking at what can we do to improve. So please don't run off at the end without sharing your feedback. Lastly, the slides and the recording will be shared, so you don't need to worry about scribbling down loads of notes and things. So we'll send out the recording after the session today. Okay, I think that's it. So I'm going to hand over now to oh sorry, no, it's not it. It's a poll. I'd forgotten about that. Right, if you could grab your phones or your web browser, and if you just go to menti.com, so it's on there on the screen, so menti.com. Whatever you do, don't disconnect from this webinar, otherwise you won't be able to hear us or see us. And then there's a code that you need to put in once you're on Menti. The code is at the top of the screen there on the right. So it's 88851572. I think Sophie's put that in the chat as well. You should be able to see it at the top of the screen. So some of you are there already. That's brilliant. So really simple question. So just to get a feel for where you're all at, does your organisation use HVO at the moment? So you've got yes, will do soon, probably will, but not for a while, no, or don't know. I can see that's brilliant. 66 of you are on there already, so clearly used to these school sessions. You've got Menti on your phones. Okay, I can see there's still lots of you still submitting your responses. Okay, that's interesting. So, yeah, many of you are, yes, we will do soon, guessing why you're here today to find out some lessons learned and hearing the experience of organisations who've been through this. Yeah, okay, so most of you are yes, will be doing soon or probably. Okay, and a few of you saying no. Okay, yeah, the next question there. So if you do use it, to what extent approximately does it replace conventional diesel? So is it about 100%, is it about 50%, about 25%, less than 25%, or not applicable? So yeah, I know there was only not that many of you who were already using it. But just interesting to see what your perspective is. Okay, so what we got 11 of you saying yes, 100%, 11, just over half. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, thanks. Right, so now it is time to hand over, I think, to, I haven't forgotten anything else, have I? No, to hand over to Gemma and Rob, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to talk about HVO. And thanks to the Supply Chain School for inviting us and hosting this event. Although we may have been cursing them yesterday as we tried to get all the slides together. But the agenda for today is pretty simple. Just an introduction to Lovell and our sustainability journey so far. We'll touch on some of our existing carbon reduction projects, and then we'll discuss HVO, the challenges it gave us whilst implementing the move over to HVO, the results, and where we're going next. So who are we? I'm Rob Warboys, Head of Procurement and Sustainability. I've been in procurement for 30 years and picked up an interest in sustainability back in 2007. That was the year when the Code for Sustainable Homes was introduced, and I was responsible for researching the code for our business, costing out the strategies to achieve it, and then rolling out training through the business. And that was followed by a joint pilot with Tarmac, where we built a pair of example plots to Code 4 and Code 6 on Nottingham University land. And from then on, I was hooked.
I'm Gemma Tovey, the Sustainability Lead at Lovell. I graduated university in 2016 and did 2 years of sustainability consultancy work before joining Lovell 3 years ago.
As you can see, Gemma's the brains behind the organisation. She's the one that tells me what we should be doing, and it explains it all to me in one syllable words. So I get it. So the business itself, Lovell, primarily a house builder operating nationally, building for both open market sale and social housing for RPs and local authorities. We also do some planned maintenance work, all housing based. And we're part of the wider Morgan Sindall Group, which spans a whole range of different businesses operating in the built environment sector, as you can see from the slide.
As part of Morgan Sindall Group, we introduced a science-based target to reduce our carbon emissions based on a 2-degree global temperature increase back in 2018. Due to the progress we were making, we re-evaluated that in 2020 and decided to move our baseline year from 2016 to 2018. Our reduction targets are by 30% for Scope 1, 2, and then separately Scope 3 by 2025, and then a 60% reduction by 2030. Alongside that, we've also got a commitment to reach net zero by 2030, which does require an element of offsetting. As part of that, we've therefore created a partnership with the Blenheim Estate to create 9 new woodlands and plant more than 250,000 trees. We also have accreditation, so we have a CDP ranking of A+, ESOS, and we also have CMARS accredit our carbon emissions every year. So this is the scope of our reporting for Lovell. As you can see, it separates out Scope 1, 2 and 3. Scope 1 are our direct emissions and Scope 2 and 3 are our indirect emissions. Scope 3 is where all of our supply chains sit. This is Morgan Sindall Group's latest reported figures for our tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So it shows our 2016 original baseline year, our 2018 new baseline year, and then 19 and 20. Now, as you can see, we've been on a downward trajectory from 2016. And although 2020 is a bit of an anomalous year due to COVID, we would have undoubtedly still reduced our carbon emissions against 2019. As part of the 23,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent reported in 2020, Lovell were 3,500 tonnes of that.
So this graphic represents the Lovell emissions in 2020, which is our last certified year. We're just, Gemma is working on putting together the 2021 figures for audit. And the fundamental takeaway from this is the third item, the third bullet point. Bulk fuel purchases represent the lion's share of Lovell emissions at just over 1,400 tonnes. Bulk fuel for Lovell is typically consumed by our site operations. So it's red diesel that we use to run generators and telehandlers primarily. And that puts it up there as our biggest area to target some sort of reduction. It's really important to us in reducing our numbers. Next slide. So that's the first Menti question that we wanted to ask you. What alternative technologies are you considering or are you using now to reduce your operational carbon? Vote now. There's no prizes. Is that about it? Some interesting things there. Good. So, you know, quite a high number, 13 are already on a hydrogen journey. That's really interesting. We've not quite got there yet. Hybrid and solar generators, yeah. Battery storage. Okay, super. Next slide. So these are some of the things that we've been doing over the last few years to tackle our emissions. I wouldn't imagine any of these come as a surprise, and no doubt you'll all have your own views on what does and doesn't work. But you know, some of the things are really straightforward. Moving to electric company cars, getting all your supplies REGO, looking at your energy efficiency offices, energy efficiency in offices. I guess the start of our journey with alternative fuels began in 2019. We came across Shell GTL, which funnily enough is made by Shell, which was an alternative fuel that offered lower pollutants and improved air quality. Didn't have huge benefits around carbon saving, but we wanted to give it a go and try something new. So we chose a site up in Manchester, and we managed to get JCB to agree to a trial with us, which was, I think that was the first trial that they'd done of alternative fuels in the field. So we had a brand new telehandler from JCB delivered, and off we went with the trial. And that was successful, no problems on site. JCB gave it a tick in the box, so it was a success as far as we were concerned. But didn't really deliver us much of a carbon benefit. And then we started to see HVO reported, and that was a whole different kettle of fish. Can we have the next slide, Sophie? Thank you. So HVO, what is it? Hydrogenated vegetable oil. And if you want to understand the technology behind it and how it's made, then I suggest you jump on Google, because I'm not the person to explain it. It's quite a complex thing, but it is vegetable oil based. It's plant based. In its simplest terms, what it gives you is a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which I'm sure most of you already know. And interestingly enough, Gemma was checking on the DEFRA conversion figures for HVO yesterday, and that they're actually giving it a higher reduction than that. But it's also a drop-in fuel. It's a direct substitute for diesel and gas oil. There is no need to drain down your tanks, no need to get new machinery on site. You can just start using it. And I do recall standing in front of the board, explaining that to them after being promised that was the case by the manufacturer and the providers, and I was still crossing the fingers that actually was the case, that it was as simple as pouring it into the fuel tank and away you go. The other big takeaway from this slide is that it does reduce your NOx emissions and particulate matter. So it's really great for the air quality agenda and fits with the clean air zones that we're starting to see pop up in a lot of major cities these days. Next slide. This is another slide stolen with thanks from a Speedy presentation. The important thing is really on the right hand side, it shows all the manufacturers that already approve HVO for use in their equipment. Some big names there that you'll all be really familiar with. So this is pretty much tried and tested for use. The only thing I'd say is that terms and conditions do apply to that statement. If you are planning to use it, I would check with your hirer that they approve of HVO, and if you've got older equipment, perhaps check with the manufacturer as well before you start. But nonetheless, widely approved. Some of the other things that we've seen claimed, I won't go into all of those, but the bottom one, we have seen people claiming a slight performance improvement. I'm not sure that we've seen any evidence to support that in our own sort of trials and usage so far, but the trials that we've done have been very much site-based. They haven't been laboratory conditions by any stretch of the imagination. Next slide.
So Lovell started our HVO journey back at the start of 2021. We started this by Rob and myself sitting down with the board and highlighting HVO to them and explaining the carbon benefits of this, whilst also being transparent with the cost implication that would occur. Thankfully, they were all extremely supportive, and although there is a cost implication, they felt that that would be offset by the carbon benefits that we would be achieving, and ultimately it is the right thing to do. So we worked with Speedy as a distribution partner and started a 3-month trial across our 8 regions across the nation. This allowed the sites to get familiar with the fuel. It generally made people more familiar with HVO and the fact that it's a replacement for red diesel, and allowed us to iron out any difficulties that may have occurred along the way. Following a 3-month successful trial, we then decided to roll out the use of HVO more heavily. This meant that we communicated the change to all employees via our internal newsletters, and we also introduced it to the supply chain via our supply chain newsletter so that they were aware of the changes that were being made to site as a whole. So as you're probably fully aware, there are challenges that come when you've got something like this, challenges with swapping red diesel to HVO. So we're interested to hear what you think the challenges might have been.
Some big ones coming through already, aren't they? Cost, availability, supply chain.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Ethical sourcing, that's an interesting one. Some interesting things in there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. So these are the actual challenges that we came across in no particular order. First one, reluctance from the site teams. We know that we are a conservative with a small c industry. and getting the site teams to change their behaviour to order HVO instead of diesel was a challenge at the start. There was also a reluctance to commit, as HVO does carry a premium price over red diesel, and there were some of our commercial colleagues that weren't that keen. There was also some concerns that the fuel would be inefficient, that we would end up using more, and that it would cause damage to the existing plant and machinery on site, that would lead to breakdowns, that would lead to lost production. And I have to say, our own supply chain didn't always approach it with an open mind. We had more than one instance of fitters turning up on site to a breakdown and declaring immediately and without any doubt in their mind that it was the fuel that was to blame, often before even getting out of their van. And I have to say, in every one of those instances where it came back to us and we held a proper investigation and got a manufacturer, someone more senior out on site, all those were discounted, and it all came down to just a basic machinery breakdown. There wasn't any evidence that HVO was causing us any problems, and certainly, over the last 6 months, we've seen very, very few instances. We have suffered a little bit with increased lead time. The supply chain for HVO is not that mature as yet. There aren't as many vehicles out there delivering it, and that's been a particular challenge as COVID and Brexit have affected driver availability. So we have seen increased lead times that's needed a bit more planning, caused us a few headaches. There was also a lot of confusion around mixing fuels, sites asking when their new machine was coming, when their new generator was coming, when their new fuel tank was coming, and there was quite a lot of engagement that was needed to get people over the hurdle of just fill up your diesel tank with HVO and it'll be fine. We also suffered from a bit of a coincidence, really. Start of 2021, we set a new target for reduced idling in our telehandler fleet. We get a great report from JCB LiveLink every week that tells us individual telehandler performance, how long that vehicle has been idling in the week and how much fuel it's burned to idle it. So we were really targeting an improvement in that waste. What that meant was some of our drivers were taking it very seriously, and they were switching their engines off at every opportunity, and that was causing some problems. The engines weren't getting hot enough to do a DPF regeneration, which is the filter actually cleaning itself off through temperature. And when that started to happen, the engine goes into limp mode and won't work, and then the machines were being parked on the side of the road, and it had to go through a 2-hour forced regeneration process where it was doing nothing else. And initially, all the reports we were getting back was it's HVO that's causing this, and we had to go through a process then with JCB to demonstrate it. It was actually our policy on reduced idling that was shooting us in the foot. It wasn't the fuel itself. But all in all, it was relatively a painless implementation, I would say. Next slide.
So where do we sit now? We've pursued a policy for HVO utilisation, which means that we won't accept any red diesel orders other than when we are struggling to get HVO to the site. Most sites have considered this the norm and they've successfully adopted the HVO utilisation. As Rob said, there is planning that's required due to increased lead times, but it's not hindered us too much, and most sites have adapted to this. And sites are generally really supportive of this swap now, and they're glad to be making a positive contribution towards achieving our goal of net zero by 2030. In 2021, we actually reduced our carbon emissions by almost 700 tonnes of CO2 equivalent due to switching from red diesel to HVO.
Which is a huge huge number really for us. We're really quite pleased with that. Sorry, next slide. So what could we have done better? In hindsight, we should have spent more time with boots on ground on site, doing toolbox talks with the site managers, with the forklift drivers, just running them through any of their concerns before we started asking them to take the product itself. We would have been better opting for sites that could take a bigger fuel tank. It would have solved some of the issues we had with availability, sort of the tail end of last year, beginning of this. They wouldn't have been so reliant on a regular fuel drop. And site logistics and planning, again, I did say this is a relatively immature supply chain, and what we were getting was vehicles that were a lot larger trying to deliver fuel onto our sites. And often where we've got a small site with a Bowser in the compound, it was too tight for them to get into. So we could have thought that through a bit better and made sure that the fuel tanks were in more accessible places. But again, these are, that's a relatively minor item, easily fixed once you get into it.
So moving forward, we're working to encourage ground workers and other high fuel users on our sites to make the transition from red diesel to HVO. We're aware that many of our supply chain are already considering HVO and investigating this, and some have even taken that plunge already. We also aim to achieve 100% utilisation of HVO, with it bearing in mind that there are slight issues with supply at times.
And continue working with the new technologies out there, the ones that we think we can make work: battery storage, solar, hybrid, and of course hydrogen. As and when that starts to become more widely available, that'll be a big move forward for us. So another slide stolen from Speedy, and again this sort of underlines the immaturity of this particular market. There's only 3.5 million tonnes of HVO production. None of that is in the UK. It's all the nearest to us is a European import. And while it's forecast to reach 10 million tonnes by 2030, I do have some concerns that the growth in availability will match the growth in demand, because of the sort of benefits it does give you on your carbon emissions. So that's one for us all to keep an eye on, I guess, and not lose sight of the fact that there are alternatives out there, such as the hybrid to solar, that will help reduce the amount of fuel that we need anyway. Next slide, please, Sophie. And of course, just a reminder that the fuel duty rules change from April the 1st, and none of us will be able to use red diesel on site anymore, nor will we be able to use red HVO. Any fuel supplies that we use will have to be white with the relevant duty applied. So that's near enough a 60p increase per litre in the cost of red diesel and red HVO at the moment. So that will significantly change some of the equations about what becomes cost effective for us, and what becomes cost effective to mitigate our use of fuel in the first place. That's quite interesting. Another big change for the industry to deal with coming up soon. Next slide. And that is pretty much us. I guess any questions? I think there's quite a few in the Q&A.
Yeah, there are.
Should we deal with some of those?
One that stood out to me was, have you had any issues when HVO supply has not been available and then switching back to diesel? Which the answer is no. Because it's a drop-in fuel, we were able to switch back to diesel temporarily, and then swap back again to the HVO when we were able to obtain it again.
Yeah, but we definitely have had some issues where we were that tight on supply that we couldn't wait anymore and had to put diesel in. It's one of those things with an immature supply chain. There's a question about whether we see HVO being a long-term solution. Yes, we do, providing that production can match demand. The figures based on tier 3 engines or latest stage 5, we're all stage 5. All our telehandler fleet is stage 5. We pretty much a very modern fleet.
There's some really specific questions before we get on to the bigger ones, just around
okay.
one,
Yep.
REGO, R-E-G-O, what's that?
Oh, I did answer that one.
Okay.
Gone through to everyone, but it's basically it's just electricity that's been certified as renewably sourced. So it's come from solar, wind, tidal energy.
Yeah, it comes with a guarantee that it's renewable.
And I think you've already talked about the red diesel and the rebate and everything that's happening on the 1st of April. I think you've already covered that off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll still be taxed the same way as.
Yeah, and we have a resource actually we'll signpost you to at the end that clarifies exactly what's happening there. So you'll be able to have something after today.
Okay.
There is one. Do you use HVO throughout the entire Lovell business, or do you struggle to obtain supply in some parts of the country? Rob.
We do have a couple of issues, sort of very, very remote locations, and strangely, Norwich and East Anglia seem to be a little bit of a problem area at the moment. I think we will get over it, but it might take another 3 or 4 months before we do. And that is also connected to things like driver availability. But the more of us that take it on board, I think the better the distribution network will become. And certainly Speedy is our sort of delivery partner on this, are making great strides towards building a good network to supply us. And if you want to try it, they've got 20-litre boxes in most of their depots that you can just go in and buy 20 litres of HVO to try. I'm not on commission from Speedy.
Neither are we, because they spoke at our last event as well. Yeah, so on that kind of challenges around availability, I think you emphasise the importance of just accepting that lead times are longer and that planning is absolutely key. I think that's a really important point.
Mm-hmm.
There was a really practical question actually about storage. I think it was from Sarah. With the use of bigger fuel tanks, how do you secure the tanks to ensure safe storage and reduce the risk of theft?
Okay, that is a good question. Something that we've been talking about just recently, because when it all moves to white, people will be able to use it in their cars without fear of being caught out. So we're certainly, investing in good security, good padlocks, and what we're talking about doing is making sure that there is CCTV coverage on all of our fuel tanks, so we can see who's getting there. And it'd be great if we could have something like a ring that would just record an image of who was filling up every time, rather than a continuous thing that we'd have to monitor. But it is the security of it. It is going to be a bit of an issue for us to deal with.
Okay, you've had quite a number of different people asking as well. Can you use HVO in commercial cars? Are you planning to do that? Can you use them in vehicles like lorries and so on?
I understand that you can. I'm sure that we were at the Speedy Innovation Centre just before Christmas, and I'm sure they were running their vehicles on white HVO.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they were, weren't they? So yes, seems to be the answer. But terms and conditions apply. I would check with check with whoever makes your vehicle before you put it in.
You had a question around getting approval or buy-in when you kind of came up with the idea of HVO. What tips would you give to people who are trying to make that case within their own organisations?
I think that the issue for us, not the issue, but the concern for us was there was a cost to this. There was a price to pay. And I guess in our sort of heaviest year of fuel use, we used something like 1 million litres of red diesel. That's about right, isn't it, Gemma? You'll probably remember the number better than me. And so there is an impact on the bottom line. But the important thing is, I don't think anything else gives us as much of a benefit as changing to HVO. You know, that 700 tons figure, which is yet to be audited, you know, is really substantial. So yeah, it's going to be a big help to us.
Okay, I see that Steve Betts has confirmed that they're running 19 lorries on HVO and the manufacturer supports it. So thanks Steve, for sharing that.
Thank you, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we had a question. Performance can negatively impact performance due to energy density reduction relative to EN590 diesel. What source suggests better performance and how did they get it? So it's a very specific question. Can you remember that's relating to one of your slides? Can you see where that question is?
I can't, but I get the gist of it.
Okay.
That really came from the manufacturer's figures, where they were claiming it might give you a small improvement in performance, whether that's MPG or so that's where that came from. As I said, I don't think we've come across any evidence to suggest that there is any improvement, but neither have we seen anything that suggests that it's wildly worse than red diesel.
Okay, we've had, somebody's just commented, actually referring back to the security piece around, you know, HVO, maybe it's stolen less frequently than red diesel because people don't know what HVO is. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, we'll sticker it everywhere. HVO. Can't use this in the car.
And again, another specific question here around practicalities. Have you had any experience with machine fuel filters clogging in winter and colder months?
No, no more than normal. Although we introduced this around about March, so it was just getting into spring, and we've had a mild winter so far. But I can't say that I am aware that we've had anything out of the ordinary in terms of clogging. Okie
doke. Another question just come in. I think it's been asked twice now. Where do the figures come from that show the 90% reductions on the Tier 5 engines? Again, very specific.
Okay, 90% reduction is what the manufacturers claim. It's not specific to any engine. That is the reduced carbon output of a litre of fuel, of HVO. Am I explaining that correctly, Gemma?
Yeah, so I think what's important now is it's in comparison to red diesel.
Yeah.
So running it on the same engine, then it's showing that benefit, running the different fuel on that same engine.
Okay, a question linking to that that piece earlier in about getting the buy-in at the beginning. So there's a question from Sarah, is who were the internal stakeholders that you engaged at the beginning? So what kind of roles and functions? Who were the people you engaged when considering adoption of HVO?
Commercial directors, operations, the health and safety teams, and the main board.
Yeah.
That was pretty much it, wasn't it, Gemma? That was the
that was
the real ones. Yeah.
Okay, I can see that somebody said about us answering the question about ethical sourcing. I'm just trying to find the question. But I'm guessing, I can't see the specific one, but I'm guessing it came up, didn't it, earlier on about the challenges, barriers around HVO and ethical sourcing. Yeah, so what's your view on that side of things? If you can see the specific question,
yeah,
help me out. I'm struggling to find it.
It's right at the very top of the list.
What does it say, Sophie?
How can you be sure that HVO is ethically sourced, e.g. palm oil plantations and things like that?
Okay. As far as I'm aware, it's not made from palm oil, but that's an interesting question, and one that we need to have a better look at. Is the honest answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
There was a question about whether we started using this in March 2020. It was March 2021. I might be getting my years mixed up. March 2021 is when we were launching this.
Yes, correct.
Another question here from G. Morris. Did you need to get approval from the manufacturers of the equipment before putting HVO into their equipment?
Yes, always recommend that. Thankfully, due to our trial previously with JCB, we were able to obtain that approval relatively quickly. And then with Speedy, they're the ones that are providing us with the fuel and some of the equipment, so they make sure it's all compatible.
Yeah.
I heard something interesting when we ran a webinar on this. I think I'm sure many of you were there. Again, it was with Speedy, where they were saying that some distributors, you'll find some distributors say you can't use HVO in our equipment. And very often it's because they don't realise that the manufacturers have approved the use of the fuel to these standards. And they're often sometimes making comparisons to the first generation biofuels, which did block filters and cause issues and so on. So that kind of transfer of information is sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. But the three hirers that we use probably the most are on board with it, and the suppliers of their equipment. So we're pretty well covered. There's a question there: if used in commercial vehicles, are they exempt from clean air zone charges? Can't answer that, I'm afraid. We don't run any commercial vehicles on the road, so yeah, not sure that one, I'm afraid.
And a question around storage. Have you had any issues with long-term storage of HVO? It's meant to have I think you mentioned it earlier on, the shelf life is.
Yeah,
shelf life's better than diesel.
Much better.
That's the claim. You can bunker it for longer because it's not hygroscopic, doesn't absorb moisture from the atmosphere. So from that point of view, no.
Okay, I think I'm just looking through the list. One of you has explained the kind of palm oil issue around HVO made from waste materials and vegetable oils, including used cooking oils, much of which is sourced in Asia, where palm oil is widely used. So there's an explanation there, but I believe the school's got some resources around that as well, so we can signpost those as well and follow up. Are there any other questions on there that you can see, Rob or Gemma, that we haven't covered off and you'd like to? Congratulations for answering these questions so well. There are some tricky ones in there.
Yeah, there are some tricky ones in there. Whoa. Okay. Glad somebody understands the HVO point better than me.
I can see somebody's asked again about the approximate I think you did mention this, the approximate cost difference per litre between HVO and red diesel.
Yeah, that's kind of getting into commercially sensitive areas that I probably dare not tread. What I would say is the cost differential has reduced, particularly over the last couple of months, because we've seen the cost of diesel and traditional fuels going up and up and up, because of the various supply issues in the marketplace. But because HVO is made from vegetable oil, it's not subject to that same price pressure. So the gap is narrowing, and has narrowed quite substantially. So that's as far as I can go on that one. But I'm sure we'll put a speedy contact in the follow-up email, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to talk to you about HVO. But I'll have my delivery first, please.
And we had and thanks Richard from ProRail Services, relating back to one of the points we talked about earlier on about manufacturers. So saying we've had letters of confirmation from the manufacturers of our equipment for the use of HVO, but it did take some time. The only challenge we had was we needed to purchase additional fuel cubes and still purchase red diesel for hired equipment, which did not have HVO approval.
Okay, yeah, that would be painful. Thankfully, we didn't need to go there.
Okay, I think then, thanks for answering all the questions there. I think we're just going to go to another poll, and then we'll just signpost you to some resources that may help you within the school. Okay, so big question: what's needed to encourage the uptake of alternative fuels such as HVO? I suppose it's useful to share ideas on this, and obviously through the school we've got 140 partners, so it's great for us to be able to share this kind of feedback with them as well. Case studies, absolutely. Thank you, Rob and Gemma. It is difficult to get these case studies, so thanks for coming along today and sharing. Availability, yes, we've talked about that, haven't we? Confidence, again, yes. Is it going to work?
Yeah.
Communication, return on investment case study, education remains one of the they're in the biggest fonts, which means the most popular.
Yeah.
Okay, this is brilliant. This is really useful.
Yeah.
Manufacturer guarantees, cost neutrality, supply, brilliant. And we'll share the results of all of these polls with you after the session. Just wait just a moment more, see if any more come in, or we seem to have stopped there. Okay, all right, so if we can move on. Yes, so throughout the school, as you know, we have a range of resources that are available and free for anyone to access. So I've just picked a few here that link to what we've talked about today. So you've got there, we have a plant group that sits within the school. We have many clients, contractors, plant hire companies, and so on in that group. They've worked together to create minimum standards. This is the version 2. And what this does is it indicates the minimum emissions levels that organisations should be aiming for when procuring plant. And what it's built on is all the information gained from interviews with, I think it was about 8 or 9 OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. That's the one, isn't it? OEMs, you know what I mean, my brain's
OEMs, yeah.
OEMs are current and future trends for reducing emissions from their products. So that covers things like power technologies, lifetime, other aspects. We've got at the bottom there, again, that's linked to the plant group within the school. There's a plant commitment charter that organisations can sign up to, and the standards here form the core of the standards that I talked about earlier on are actually the core of the plant commitment charter. The aim really is to raise awareness in the sector of the need to drive down air quality and greenhouse gas emissions from the plants that we buy or hire or use. We've got a guidance document that's really simple and practical, that one there, Guide to Alternative Fuels and Efficient Use of Oil. So again, a really useful one for you to look at. When you get the slide, you'll be able to just click through, the links are embedded. We've got the air quality sustainability short. Sustainability shorts within the school, they're the kind of 2 to 5 minute videos that are really good for helping to help people understand what's the issue around, what's the issue here, and what do we need to think about. So the one around air quality is, why is air quality, why is it important? It looks at some of the scary health stats and it talks about what can you do on site. Rob mentioned earlier on about around the targets around reducing idling, and then the work they've done on that. We've got the Clean Air Zones map. It's an interactive map. It's just we pull together information that's out there publicly and put it into a map so you can see the different air zones throughout the UK. We've got Sourcing Sustainable Plants, which is the e-learning module at the bottom there. That looks at common environmental impacts associated with plants and how to best mitigate them when you're sourcing for your project. We've got the one, the fuel duty equalisation and changes to red diesel rebate. So again, that's where I'd say many of you are asking about that. Great resource there. If you could move on to the next one. Yeah, so plant sustainability training schemes, that's just a directory. We've pulled together lots of the training schemes that are out there. So again, could be useful for you. And then air quality for plant and equipment. So that's half an hour e-learning module. That's again, it's another good introduction to the sustainability issues associated with air quality for plants and equipment and non-road mobile machinery. And then at the bottom there are recordings of 2 webinars we ran last year. So the first one there is best practice and low carbon fuels, and that was with Speedy Services and WP Group. So that's much more technical, I suppose, than the session today. So have a look at that. And then the other one was a webinar that we ran more around the air quality piece and working towards cleaner air quality. And that we had, I think it was Gap Group, HS2, Sunbelt Rentals, and also University of Brighton there. And that was all around collaboration and embracing innovation to help drive down emissions and reduce costs and improve the workplace environment. So I think that brings us to the end of the session. So what will happen when we close the session, a feedback form will pop up. So please do share your feedback. It's really useful, really important. We'll use it to inform future sessions. But yeah, that just leaves me to say thank you very much. Thank you, Gemma and Rob, for sparing your time today and sharing all your insights. It's been really helpful and dealing with those tricky questions. And thanks everybody for joining, and hopefully see you at one of the school webinars very soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, EJ. Brilliant.